Okay, hello everybody. This is Delivering Better Streets, and with this episode, we are going to look at floating bus stops. So, floating bus stops are a bit of a tricky issue. Um, Here's some ideas of perhaps why. We've named them. Once you name something, you can coalesce around whether you like them or not. They can be unfamiliar, although they're in some towns and cities in the UK. Generally, you don't see very many of them. They're another thing for people to do with in the street, and sometimes there's a bit of noise and heat around them, stoked by a bit of controversy in the media, perhaps. Some people, unfortunately, are using them to project their own anti-cycling sentiments, and they are a trade-off and a compromise because there's different people who have different issues with them, um, and so you've got to try and come up with the best design possible. Let's talk quickly about the idea of a Pedinger. This is coined by Professor Nick Tyler of University College London, and this is the state of flux that somebody's in between being a bus passenger and being a pedestrian. So you're waiting for the bus, you're worried about when it's coming, you're making sure you've got your card or your change, you're shopping your kids to get on or off the bus, and maybe in reverse as you get off. So you want to stop somewhere, gather your thoughts, and your shopping before you carry on. Bear that in mind as we go along. So are they new? No, they're not. Here's one which is probably dating from around the 1930s in the London Borough of Havering. It's a location I know well because I put in the little speed table there to create better access to the floating bus stop. Um, on the left here is the main carriageway. On the right here is a service road, pretty busy service road at times. Um, but because it's motor cars using it, nobody seems to have noticed. Here's one on the A10 in Hackney, on the borough of Hackney. Pretty awful to get to. There's no drop curbs nearby. The surfacing of that service road is stone sets, very uncomfortable, not particularly accessible. But again, nobody's really shouting about this one because it's been there a long time. And here's one also in London, in Brent, Kenton Road, massive wide road there on the left, another service road, and people have worn their own design line across the grass there because there isn't a path or a drop curb to immediately get to it. This is actually on the main footway, so there is a footway on the service road. But as you can see, the bus shelter is quite big and it blocks the footway. But again, nobody's noticed it, so there's no fuss about this. Let's look to Northern Europe. So here's an example from Copenhagen. The actual crossing of the main carriageway here has been cleverly implemented here with bus stop. Um, the bus shelter is on the right-hand side on the footway, which can be a bit of an issue with people waiting for the bus. They're watching that rather than people cycling, so there's a possible source of conflict. The shelters are much better on the passenger island. Here's a stop in Malmo, high frequency bus route with bendy buses here. Really nice, generous passenger area, gives people lots of space to wait. And crucially, when the bus gets there, anybody using wheelchairs can maneuver, get on and off the bus when the ramp's deployed. And here's the busiest cycle track on the planet in Vredenburg in Utrecht in the Netherlands. Really busy bus corridor, bendy buses. Every few minutes there's a bus service running through there. And this just wouldn't work with people cycling and the buses mixing on the road there. It would hurt people, frankly. So where we're having to mix cyclists, even with a bus only road, there is an issue here, which is why we separate. Just a word on shared use bus borders, which are a bit of hybrid maybe of shared use. Used in tight spots or where there's no desire to take traffic space, which can be quite political. They do create concerns about conflict. This particular example is probably the best that we can do with them because we've got some paving of a different colour right by the bus just to give someone space to pause and give a good message to people cycling that they probably should be over a little bit. Can't use them for two-way cycle tracks. So they're there as a tool, but probably a bit of a last resort in my view. Here's an interesting one where we have a bus stop on a shared use path, quite because usually what happens is the shelter or the flag is just left there on the shared path. So again, that's a potential place for conflict. So what they've done here in Wallisdown Road in Bournemouth is they've actually created a separate passenger island within the shared use path. So it's curbed and it gives a bit of protection and this passenger space, if you like, for people to get on and off the bus. Maybe a bit narrow here, maybe a bit awkward if the wheelchair ramp is deployed. I think this would be better with contrasting paving, possibly some guidance tactiles to get people from the shared path to the actual bus shelter. You do see these in more suburban and rural parts of the Netherlands where there isn't very many people walking. This is an industrial estate, so it's not that heavy in terms of pedestrian flow. Um, so that's one to bear in mind. That's quite useful, that design in my view. So what about some better designs then? Um, if we've got something like this one on Histon Road in Cambridge, we're squeezing the cyclist down into a fairly narrow cycle track here, and we have a chicane around the bus stop. Coupled with the fact you've got some vertical curb faces that you can just see here on the right hand side, but you've got them both sides. That kind of erodes your effective width. You've got bollards, which are set back a little bit, thank goodness, in this example. But it's another thing that people will shy from because of the handlebars. And you can see the chicane as you go off into the distance there. You're having to take the correct line through so you don't clip the curb. So if all these things you're concentrating on, is the person cycling having the full attention on somebody using the bus or about to use the bus? I think you can do much better in terms of layout to try and deal with those particular issues. Very tight again, very contested in terms of space, but it could be a bit smoother. The curbs could be forgiving. It could be a much better layout for cycling. So things like having that decent island size for pedestrians, which is not cluttered. Gentle cams and crosswalks throughout, and that's for people cycling and for people using the bus in the passenger area. Forgiving curves to the cycle track, so they're not going to throw people off or catch a wheel. And clear views through the shelter so people can see and be seen. Here's a really old example, probably 10 years old or more, from Lewis Road in Brighton Hove. This actually is a cycle lane within a bus lane, but all the bus stops themselves have been floated. And it's a really nice example of the space done really well. Other things we can do is to have the correct tactile paving. So if we are going to have a zebra crossing over the cycle track, let's have the L-shaped red blister paving to show people it is a controlled crossing. If we're not, then we should be putting the buff tactile paving in and make sure we go back to the guidance on tactile paving. It's there to be used. If we use it consistently, that helps the people that rely on tactile paving most. Consistent bus layouts for the bus drivers is important. So this example at Great Eastern Road in Newham. So the buses are on left-hand side here going away from us. The problem here is the flag is just out of view here on the right-hand side of the photo. And the way that buses are set up in London is the drivers are meant to stop with the front wheel in line with the flag itself. And so in this example, the doors would be opening in line with the crossing here. So if a wheelchair user wanted to get on, the doors on an underbus are actually on the rear doors, so the bus is stopping in the wrong place. So let's just make sure the buses are stopping right in line at the main crossing to the floating bus stop. We should also be consistent in terms of having drop curbs or gentle humps, just to give people that level crossing surface. We've also got opportunities to have better lateral space for people. So unlike that one in Cambridge, this one here at Blackfriars Road in Southwark is wide because it's actually a two-way track. Doesn't look it because there's no centre line, but it is a two-way track. There's lots of space for people to change direction, adjust their position, in terms of position left and right on the cycle track. And that's how people can negotiate using the space together. Things like audible announcements on the buses are useful. And of course, training and publicity, we never seem to have that. And that's probably a big missing link. And there's also something in network planning. So actually, if there's a high frequency bus corridor and a high frequency cycle corridor needed, sometimes if we can separate those, that's useful, notwithstanding the fact that people cycling, like anybody else, want to get to every single doorway on the street. So we need to be very careful how we do that because people just behave as you'd expect. They want to get to places. So, what alternatives do we have? The problem, even with mini zebra crossings, is there a traffic control, motor traffic control system? Um, so, does human scale movement respond to administrative control? Not always, which is why sometimes the zebra crossings are problematic. If you try and put signals across the cycle track, as you have here in Wood Street in Cardiff, I imagine the compliance is very, very low. And anybody relying on that compliance for their own safety, so a visually impaired person, I think has been giving a false sense of security here. So you can design signals with floating bus stops cleverly as part of a crossing of the main road or within a junction. So actually, it does make sense to people using it from a cycling perspective, but be very careful trying to apply rules to people because people break the rules. It's not as if they're sort of little cars on a fixed path, as it would with motor traffic design. Sometimes wide bus lanes are promoted as a solution here. Um, and the questions I always ask are, will most people be happy mixing with buses? I suspect they won't be, especially on a busy bus route. Um, and there's no alternatives if to floating bus stops if you want to have two-way cycle tracks. It's just impossible to design these things. Example here for wide bus lane on Whitechapel Road in Tower Hamlets in London, London Cycleway 2, which is mainly separated. This can be really contested here with buses pulling in and out and people overtaking each other and bus drivers overtaking cyclists. It really doesn't work at all. So, if we're not going to go Dutch, let's go Colombian. Here's probably the only design I've found in international guidance that's not a floating bus stop. And essentially, what happens here is you have a cycle track that runs into the bus stop. Cyclists are then expected to, if they want to, I guess they can stop. They can go around the bus and overtake the bus. And the space between the bus and the main running lane next to them here has a skinny island, which a driver can't get through. Um, I'm not sure that's a particularly safe, convenient, attractive, or comfortable experience to use that. And certainly, if you have a little poke around Colombia in Google Street View, you tend to find the traditional floating bus stops, as I've just talked about there. So, a bit of a roundup for you. Here's what we do at City Infinity. Big old list of things there. So, do give me a shout if you have a project I can help with. And this is how you get to us on various social media. Thank you very much.